Good morning, everyone, and thank you for attending our first ever virtual CDBG full certification training. On the phone today, we have Steve Charleston, myself, Rebecca Shademan, Amber Ward, and Nissa Rasmussen is helping me also monitor chat functions. So how we set up this event is we currently have the panelists have full function of their microphone. Everyone else right now was muted upon entry, and the only way we can unmute you guys is if you notify us that you have a question. So if you have a question, feel free to use the Q&A function on the webinar, and that's usually in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. If it's not there, you can also use the chat function. We're monitoring both of them because it seems that individuals have been using both during our presentation. So we are keeping an eye on them. So whichever way you would like to communicate questions with us, this is all very new for all of us. So normally these presentations are very interactive with everybody. So the more questions that come from you guys, the better, because then we can react to it and make sure everything's good to go. So you have a couple different options. You can type a question, or you can ask to be unmuted, and we can then unmute you specifically, and we can go that route. So whichever one you're more comfortable with, just let us know, and we'll make it happen. So, but in the meantime, again, we have it set up that everyone's muted on entry, but if you want to just do a double check and make sure that your phone is also on mute, that would be very helpful. So welcome to webinar 1. So we'll just make sure that we have, and Steve, just want to make sure you are unmuted right now. And I will be passing control over to you.
When's that happen?
Shortly now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, you now have access. Oh, did I make you the presenter? Oh, this is so much fun. Sorry. We were already having technology problems.
I'm okay.
Oh. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, Steve, you have control now, and so I'll let you begin.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Welcome, everyone. It's a beautiful morning, at least here at my remote site at home, and wherever all of you are also located today. We appreciate y'all participating in the virtual presentation. Prefer, as Rebecca said, to be in person so that we could engage with you with regards to questions as we go through the process. So don't hesitate, even when the virtual is over with. If you have some other questions, you're welcome to email us, and we will be glad to help you out with regards to those questions. So before we get started into the overall presentation, we want to go through a little bit of the history of the program and to give you a layout of what we're going to do today. So we're going to talk about the history of the program in terms of Nebraska, when we took on the program back in 1982, when the Community Development Block Grant Program was block granted down to states by the executive and congressional action. We'll talk about the eligible applicants and the recipients of CDBG funds, and we'll talk about national objectives, eligible and ineligible activities as I go through this part of the presentation. Now, I want to make sure that we're clear with the certification training we're provided. This is with the Community Development Block Grant Program. There are other two components. There's the coronavirus as far as the CARES Act that's embedded in part of the program in terms of our annual action plan. And then there's also the community development DR, which is the disaster piece. And we're not highlighting those components, but these do have, in terms of the presentation, a relationship, especially when we talk about national objective, eligible activities, ineligibles, and moving forward when we get further into the presentation about income surveys and documentation required to accept federal funds. So, are you moving the screens, Rebecca? Or are you still there, Rebecca?
Hi, Steve. I did give you back control, but when you have control, I'll just move through the screens for the first
I
round.
wasn't sure based upon our initial conversations. So let's move through this, as we have all morning, so we're doing okay. With regards to the Community Development Block Grant Program, it's the Housing Community Development Act that was established in 1974. It's funded through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. The actual act has been amended in a number of cases through Congress, and with reauthorization. Reauthorization hasn't taken place for several years. What they do in terms of reauthorization and what has happened, they made changes, for example, adding economic development activities into the Housing and Community Development Act over the years. Within the act also, there are a number of sections, and those deal with, for example, affirmatively furthering fair housing. And when we get into the session that talks about Davis-Bacon and procurement, Davis-Bacon is actually embedded in the act. So if you have questions later on, and why are we undertaking certain federal requirements, is because there are a number of requirements attached to the Community Development Act and the CDBG that are not attached to other federal programs. So one of those is Davis-Bacon and the related acts, the environmental review process, specifically through the Environmental Policy Act, ties directly into HUD. So there's a number of items we can't overlook. When you look at the resources, 24 CFR Part 570 is an excellent piece. And I always recommend, when you go into the CFRs looking for the regulatory aspects of programs, that you go into the electronic version. A lot of times when you do searches, it'll pull up other types of resources provided by those legal entities, attorneys and other firms, but it's always important to make sure that you're looking at the electronic version, which is considered to be the most current. There's also HUD.gov, and one of those sites that I would recommend that you actually register for so that you can log into, which you don't have to, but it's the HUD Exchange. The HUD Exchange covers many aspects of what we'll be talking about through the training events and the webinars as we move forward. You want to add anything, Rebecca? There are three primary goals of the Housing and Community Development Act. Those deal with decent housing, a suitable living environment, and expanding economic opportunities. And you'll find those goals actually in the accomplishments as we move into a number of items and we talk about how does the activity relate. It's either housing related or it deals with the environment or economic opportunities. Go ahead, Rebecca. And how does the funding, the money move down from HUD? HUD allocates the funding. Congress makes the appropriations. The appropriations in terms of how much money is going to go into a state program and how much is going to go into the entitlement program. The state of Nebraska is a non-entitlement. We receive approximately $10 million on an annual basis, depending upon a formula that's set in place. That formula takes into account a number of factors with regards to low moderate income persons, a number of characteristics. There's also the entitlement program. The entitlement program serves, generally speaking, those local governments of 50,000 population plus, dependent upon census and the metropolitan definition of that area, such as Grand Island, was the most recent one added. Bellevue and Lincoln and Omaha. Lincoln and Omaha have been entitlements for a number of years. With regards to the funding, the state of Nebraska for CDBG cannot invest in activities within the entitlement program since they receive directly from HUD an allocation of funds. Next. This is an area that Rebecca and others are very familiar with. There are requirements in order to receive those funds from HUD. So before we actually receive a grant agreement to sign off on, we have to complete requirements. One of them is a 5-year requirement. That's our consolidated plan, which we just participated and went through recently, and you may have reviewed that, provided comments. That's on our webpage. That's a 5-year plan. And then annually, there's a 1-year plan. That 1-year plan that's in place now for the first year, 2020, which has not been approved yet, but it's been submitted. That deals with meeting various priorities, goals, and strategies and metrics within the consolidated plan. We actually went through a process recently that you may be aware of, dealing with a substantial amendment to our 2019 annual action plan. That amendment allowed us to actually engage the CARES Act, the CV portion, with regards to public service, public facilities, and economic development assistance to for-profit businesses so that they could participate in those activities that are related directly to the coronavirus. And as with the standard, I'd call it CDBG allocation, those that are eligible to apply directly are local units of governments, and they can apply on behalf of the for-profit and the nonprofit as they do within the annual allocation. There's also another study that's completed I'd say on the same path as a consolidated plan, and that's the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And that looks at all the barriers there are to fair housing. And that also is a presentation on how those barriers can be removed and through what resources are available to do those. We also do an annual report, an evaluation report that looks at the grants that are awarded, the activities, and that view the dollar amounts plus the national objectives that are met by those units of local government that are the grantees. Next, Rebecca.
So I just wanted to add.
Oh, go ahead.
Thanks. So
Sure.
for everyone, just a quick recap. Consolidated plan is for 5 years. The annual action plan highlights what we're going to do within 1 year, and we submit an annual action plan and create one each year. There is public comment on the consolidated plan and annual action plan. Every year we are required to do a 30-day public comment period. Our analysis of impediments to fair housing choice will be posted on our website later this week, but that is a statewide approach regarding the analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And our consolidated, and please remember, our consolidated plan and annual action plan are only for the non-entitlements. So all those entitlements that so all of these organizations, us as CDBG, Bellevue, Grand Island, Lincoln, and Omaha, we all have to do these 4 documents to ensure that we get our CDBG allocation each year and to remain in compliance. So usually our analysis of impediments is every 5 years, depending on what's going on. And then the Consolidated Annual Performance Evaluation Report, that is also commonly known as the CAPER. And that is just reporting on how we did in meeting the goals we identified in our annual action plan. So if we said we were going to build 5 houses, then we identify in our report to the public and to HUD that we then identify how many houses we did build during that year. So hopefully that'll make sense. If anybody has questions, I do see we have a question. So we have a question from an attendee. Will a new analysis of impediments to fair housing choice be completed in the near future? Last one I was aware of was done in 2011. Correct. The last one that we did was back in 2011. We just updated it, and I'm posting the final on Friday, if not earlier, and we'll be sending out an email to you guys and certified administrators and the public housing authorities, since you are all some of the main folks that are using that. So it's a very interesting read. So if you guys want to learn a little bit more about the makeup of our state and the housing going on and the racial and ethnicity breakdowns and fair housing options that are available, it's a good read. So I don't see any more questions. Feel free. Thank you for sending in questions, guys. So for our 5-year consolidated plan, we identified 4 main goals. Those are to increase availability of affordable housing, enhance public facilities and infrastructure, encourage economic development, and support vital public services. So for the next 5 years, somehow we will be focusing on these 4 goals and making sure we achieve the goals that we set up. So for our first year, we determined that we are making 9 funding opportunities available, and each of these funding opportunities in some ways will be benefiting and reaching those goals in some capacity. So just be aware, we do have to federally report on how we are doing with meeting our goals on an annual basis. Do you have anything else you want to add?
I just wanted to comment. Can you hear me, Rebecca?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to ask everyone how they're enjoying the refreshments this morning. Usually Rebecca provides those, but hopefully where you're at, you have those. Another item, want to make sure that you all recognize there is a quiz that comes about following the presentation, and make sure you complete that quiz with regards to this event. That's very important. So if you're not aware of that, make sure you contact us on the quiz. The other thing that Rebecca talked about in terms of the firmly furthering fair housing and the plan that's being done and ready to go up shortly. Uh, she did mention housing authorities. Housing authorities contact the department to make sure that their plan is consistent with the state's consolidated plan. So those housing authorities that are working with HUD submit information to us, and we fill out forms to make sure that their housing authority plan is consistent with the state's. The analysis of impediments for housing, Nebraska Investment Finance Authority played a major role in that, and especially in the data that we package to put in with our contractor, our consultant. So we do appreciate all that they've done and others to put together the analysis of impediments and the fair housing piece. Um, what you see here in terms of funding opportunities, for those that are not aware of it, with Amplifund, which is our consultant provider for packaging applications that come to us now and for data. Uh, they're called opportunities. As Rebecca mentioned, there are 9 currently within the annual action plan for 2020. I encourage you to keep and be aware of, as we go from year to year, these opportunities may drop off or some may be added. Um, when we talk about HUD's involvement in this process, there's a number of requirements that the state has to meet, a number of regulatory pieces, and one of those is timely expenditures. One of those is making sure that we actually complete and close out our grants timely. So those are another items that if you get involved in the process as a certified administrator, you may find yourself in a position to assist us in making sure the grantee spends their money expediently as they move through the process. The emergent threat is a piece that's relatively new in the last year and a half. The youth job training coming online deals with some very specific items. If you're interested in that, Rebecca worked on that quite a bit. The water, wastewater, and tourism. If you have questions, you can talk to me and any of those others. The owner-occupied rehab, our housing team, takes care of that aspect, and then economic development is in our economic development team, and then there's a split amongst people in terms of staff that are working on a number of these items. I also want you to make sure that you understand when you look at funding opportunities that you look at the schedule of when those applications may be open, and may also when those application submittals are due. And they do go through the Amplifund process for the opportunities. So we do have webinars on those also. So look at our schedule there. Anything else, Rebecca?
Nope, I think you covered it fairly well there. I'll
Okay.
move on to the next slide.
Did you have your coffee yet?
I'm drinking it now.
Good, then you're ready to go.
So the first couple of slides talked about what we as the state have to do in order to receive CDBG funds and distribute to local units of government. Normally, this is part of the responsibility of the state. We do reach out to the public for guidance and recommendations and public comments. And so those when we do that, we do release a news release and to request public comments and ways that we can change up our programs. So we encourage you to do that. So our next one won't be probably until December timeframe or November, when we are doing our CAPER public comment period. But just because we finished everything up. So the next slides are really talking about when you are a local unit of government and you wish to receive CDBG funds. So overall, when we are distributing the funding at the state level to local units of government, we are making sure activities are eligible, activities are meeting a national objective, and the activities are fundable. So there are eligible recipients. So as Steve talked, we are the non-entitlement community area, and so we can only provide funding to those local units of government that reside in the non-entitlement area. We cannot provide funding to Omaha, Bellevue, Lincoln, or Grand Island. And so local units of government can be a city, a county, and we do also have special policies. Normally the local unit of government is the lead applicant, but they can partner with for-profit businesses or nonprofit organizations for specific projects. So we're going to talk about national objectives here. So just everyone remember, the only applicant that can apply is the local unit of government. So we cannot get an application from a nonprofit organization. It always has to come from the city of Albion or the county, Platte County. It cannot come from a nonprofit organization as the lead or a business. Steve, do you want to take the lead on this one?
I'll do that. Thank you. So as Rebecca mentioned, there's a fundability test. And that fundability test is actually met throughout the life of the grant. So in the application process, the reviewers test the applicant with regards to fundability. And one of those items is meeting a national objective. Under the Housing Community Development Act and the actual regulations in the CFR, it outlines the national objectives. There's 3 national objectives, and hopefully you'll remember this. There's the low moderate income, which deals with 80% of the terms of the median income. And then there's slum and blight that deals with the conditions of the community or the area. And then there's urgent need that deals with public safety, health, and welfare. The low moderate income is broken down into 4 areas: area benefit, limited clientele, housing, and jobs. And then slum and blight can be dealt with on an area basis or a spot basis. And then we'll go through some of the details on the next slides. So 2 CFR 570.483, that deals with the national objectives in the Federal Register. So looking at benefit low moderate income persons at the 80% or less, and that's on a county basis or based upon the state, depending upon which number is the highest. And if you're looking for those numbers with regards to the, say, the income based upon number of persons in that household, that's on our webpage also. If you can't find us, let us know. It's easier to look at what the home layout is in terms of how it's, say, laid out with regards to a spreadsheet versus the CDBG one. So it's much easier to read that, and that's a critical item, especially when it comes into, as Rebecca will talk about, income surveys, and when you're looking at low moderate income for jobs regarding retention or creation of jobs. Aid and prevention, elimination of slums and blight. That's an area that we'll talk in greater detail about. And then when it comes to meeting community development needs that have a particular urgency for that local unit of government, that they're unable to fund or obtain other sources of funding. And urgent need is a difficult one. In most cases, as you go through our opportunities, you'll see that we've assigned those national objectives to eligible activities that meet the fundability test and that we're looking to assign. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the reasons why we focus particularly on the benefit to low moderate income persons at the national objective level. So this is an item that's not waived. There's no way to waive the national objective with regards to any of the other funding sources that tie into community development block grant program. So as I mentioned, that's from beginning to end. It's measured at the application phase when you submit it for review as fundability. It's measured when we get into doing an approval and grant agreements. It's measured in the performance plan when you submit your reports. And then it's also measured when we do compliance review and when we move into closeout of the grants. Okay, Rebecca. The state has a requirement they have to meet, and this is why our focus is heavily on benefit to low moderate income persons, because regulatorily 70% of the state's CDBG funding must benefit low moderate income persons. And that's 70% of our allocation that's distributed to local units of government for those activities that they're funded. So the way this is laid out, the states are provided the opportunity to determine whether or not they want to do a 1, 2, 3-year community development plan. The state of Nebraska does a 3-year community development plan where at least 70% of those funds distributed over that 3-year period must meet the national objective of benefit to low moderate income persons, which can be done in one of those 4 classifications on an area benefit, limited clientele, households, or by jobs. So historically, we've run into situations where we've had to take our opportunities or categories back then and restrict them to benefit to low moderate income persons, because in the second year of our plan, we were in a position where we knew we'd exceed the amount of funds that were non-LMI. So we measure this on an annual basis, and we measure this as we progress through our annual grant to keep on track. So this is a very important piece that is actually tested by the federal government. Did you want to add anything to that, Rebecca?
The only thing I would add is, Steve mentioned earlier at the beginning of the presentation, annually we normally get about $10 million. So that means that $7 million that we distribute to local units of government have to be meeting the national objective low to moderate income. In the grand scheme, we at the state level focus on making sure that we are in line with keeping with our benefit period requirement year with the federal government. So just be aware, like when you are working on projects, if you can figure out a way to fund it through a national objective low to moderate income, you have a much likelier chance of getting it funded essentially. We have only 30% of our funding can be spent on the other 2 national objectives. So it makes it, we're dealing with a smaller bucket of money. So just an FYI on that piece.
And when you review and put applications together, or you step into the process as a certified administrator, and you wonder why, say if you ask for an amendment to your grant and that amendment folds into a different national objective, you're going to have difficulty in having that approved. And then your reporting will also be, and so we need to look at, so we'll talk later about accomplishments and how you report with regards to metrics there. But as Rebecca said, that's extremely important. So when you look at some of our opportunities, you'll find that the only national objective you can meet, for example, under water, wastewater, and public works is benefit to low moderate income persons. And usually that's on an area basis. So next,
And Steve, we
please.
did
Yes.
receive a question. Does the 70% calculation include the entitlement communities, or is the state calculation kept separate? So I'll answer this, Steve, and you can let me know if you need to add anything. So the state non-entitlement has 70% requirement, and the entitlements have that 70% requirement also. So we have separate buckets of funding. So we received $10 million. So that means $7 million of that has to go through low moderate. Grand Island received $3 million, and then 70% of that needs to be towards low moderate income. So they're separate buckets of information. And does that make sense?
You talking to me?
Well, I'm hoping the person who asked the question will ask.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
But
Yeah, so
if you want to clarify.
no,
Okay, thank you.
the rule is applied directly to the grantee of HUD. So the entitlements are a grantee, the states are a grantee. So as Rebecca said, Nebraska has to meet the test as a non-entitlement, independent of what the entitlements do on the 70%. And there's some other factors that play into it with when we look at general administration and other items. But as Rebecca said, if you look at our allocation, it's around 7 million that's distributed out there to benefit low moderate income persons, because that is the primary objective of the Housing and Community Development Act, is to benefit low moderate income persons. And that's one of the reasons the 70% test is within the actual, is regulatory and within the regulations in the act as far as principally benefiting low moderate income persons. Okay, any other questions? All right. What does that mean when you get into the benefit tests and the accomplishments? So you have under the low moderate income national objective, if you remember the schematic, there's area, limited, housing, and jobs. So how do we measure those in terms of accomplishments? If you remember, everything's persons except housing. Housing's made, accomplishments are measured based upon the households benefiting, because the assistance you're providing is to that household. And in our case, it's owner occupied rehab. So that household needs to qualify when they go through the eligibility aspect of the review of that household in terms of income eligibility for that client. Then that household is measured in terms of actual achievements. So if you have an owner occupied rehab grant and the proposed beneficiaries are 10 units, as we go through that process, we measure those, and we measure those based upon households. The area benefit is a service area, which is defined, as we'll speak about, in terms of how that activity benefits those persons within the service area. So that's measured by persons, or at least 51% plus must benefit low moderate income persons. Limited clientele breaks down into 8 items, which we'll talk about. And then job creation is at the time of basically hire if it's creation. If it's retention, it's measured at a period where those jobs are considered to be retained. If it's made available to, it's at the review process also. So remember how this matches up. I would make sure you check this screen, this slide. You might want to hold this information later if you're dealing with a quiz or an exam. Okay, Rebecca.
Cool. And I just wanted to point out, we added our CFR references if you guys wanted to read into these a little bit more and see exactly what was written at the federal level on authorizing these national objectives.
So on an area basis, you can meet the national objective based upon U.S. Census data. So if you look at the American Community Survey, that's posted. You can find that information. It's based upon what HUD actually puts out in terms of data when they make their calculation and determination of the benefit. And they do that for all local units of government, but in some cases, a number of those, the local unit of government will be below the 51%. And if they are below that 51%, then there's the opportunity to undertake a survey, which could be a census survey, meaning you survey, if at all possible, all those persons within that service area. And if your service area becomes of the size that census doesn't fit, then you would actually go in and do a random sample survey. And there's more detail to follow in the presentation when it comes to those factors. So those
Steve,
are,
I just wanted to, before we move on to the next screen, I wanted to just show everybody. So for LMA, one of the first things that you would do to see where is your community at is you would go to the HUD Exchange. And one of the areas that you would check, HUD has put together an Excel spreadsheet of everything here, and we are able to view that. And it's currently based on the 2011 to 15 low moderate ACS data. So once you click on that link, you'll get a spreadsheet like this come up. And then you can, you can, this is the entire nation. So you'll need to filter it down. And then you will then take a look at the community that you are looking at. So let's say we are looking at Alma City. And it shows here that according to HUD's records, they have 44.3%. And as you recall, our lovely number for us to have a community qualify under LMA needs to be at 51%. So this community would need to, if they still wanted to do a project, they would need to conduct an income survey for us to see if they qualify under LMA. So just an FYI, and we're going to talk about income surveys later, so I don't want to get too much in the weeds on that. So for the city of Alvo here, they're identified at 52%. So depending on their activity, they potentially would be eligible underneath the LMA national objective. Okay, does that all make sense? We did have a question, if you are 50.6%, do you get to round up, or is 51% the lowest to be eligible? HUD does not allow rounding on this aspect of the program, so you have to be at least 51%. So if you have decimals, we cannot round up. So good question there. So, and this, we do have links to this on our website. Also the HUD Exchange, it's also there to get you information. So we'll touch upon this website a little bit more as we go through the PowerPoint presentation.
Is that it?
Yep, yes.
Okay. And as Rebecca said, remember too that this changes on an annual basis. I mean, this isn't held there in perpetua in forever, because it changes. And what happens when it changes, a community can drop off, go under the 51, and communities can go above the 51. So if you're thinking that the community you're looking at is 51.2% now, before you submit an application in a couple years out, make sure you look, So that's really important to do that analysis to make sure that if you need to do an income survey or not.
Hey,
So,
Steve,
yes,
can you provide us a couple examples of types of projects that qualify under LMI on an area basis?
I can if you want me to.
Yes.
Thank you, I will. Uh, so for example, under water, wastewater, we have that opportunity. It's on a low moderate income, it's on an area basis. So you would have, say, for example, a number of maybe 1, 2 wells replaced that are contaminated, or you would have a water tower that would be replaced that service the entire community. So all the community benefits from that, but it also has a number of persons that are low moderate income that exceed 51%. So there are those beneficiaries that are in that community greater than 51% in terms of low moderate income. You could also, on an area basis, determine what a service area is within a community. So you could have a part of a community, and maybe it has natural or man-made boundaries, and you could determine that um, if the community is large enough, it may have more than one community center, recreation center that services a part of that community. And when you look at the boundaries of that area, those persons within that are greater than 51% based upon, say, a survey that was undertaken. You could have street improvements in a community. In a number of cases, it depends upon the size of the community and the types of improvements that are being made within that community. You may have a community that's uh, their fire protection and their fire department services that community only. And that's one where you have to look at the overall service area of the fire district, and the beneficiaries are that community and its overall benefit. You have libraries that, when we look at public libraries in a community, they benefit the entire community. So there's a number of public facilities and public infrastructure that can work on an area basis. Um, what you need to remember is there are census tracts, there are block groups that are broken down, and you need to identify that service area based upon that activity, not on what best meets the numbers to arrive at 51% or greater for low moderate income benefit. So don't assume that because you have a census tract or a block group, that's going to satisfy the test based upon the activity in terms of the service area. So that's critical. And that service area must be primarily residential in nature also. So you have a number of other persons within there that we call incidental, that don't directly benefit. We don't count them, but you do count them when you actually look at the number of, for example, persons that reside in that area. So the primary beneficiaries must be low moderate income persons. So that's why that service area must be 51% or greater to identify that you're benefiting low moderate income persons. Anything else, Rebecca, you want to add?
Yes, we had a question. Would a community doing an OOR, a known or occupied rehabilitation activity, still have to meet the 51%? I'm not able to respond to you in the question and answers for some reason, so I just wanted to let you know they would qualify underneath the national objective of low moderate housing, so that they do not need to fall into LMA on that front. So we'll be getting to that national objective in a couple more slides, so I'll show you how that's done.
And we'll talk about the difference too between that and, say, persons versus households. Okay.
Okay. So we have a hypothetical question for you, Steve. A city of 1,000 people that does not meet LMI They want to do a downtown project and their downtown area is LMI. Would DED typically allow a service area in the community of this size?
Well, you have to take into consideration beyond the test of percent beneficiaries, is that area primarily residential? And also are the activities being performed to the benefit of the entire community? Or is it of the nature that, it principally benefits the low moderate income persons in that service area? So it's highly unlikely that it would meet the fundability in terms of the national objective for low moderate income on an area basis. When we get into the area, when we talk about the opportunity for economic development and essential goods and services that are provided in a community, which may be in the downtown, if a local unit of government can identify that one, that business is providing essential goods and services, and two, the essential goods and services are relied upon by low moderate income individuals within the community. That's one way, but on an area basis, as you were mentioning for a downtown, that's extremely difficult to deal with it unless that area is primarily residential, has a high mix of affordable housing units within that downtown. So it also depends upon what activity you're undertaking within the downtown. So hypothetically, if it's commercial rehab and you're trying to identify it as benefiting low moderate income persons that are residing within that area, it's not going to meet the test. So if you don't have a hypothetical question later on and you have an actual question, go ahead and present that one too, and we can look at the nature of that specific community and that service area that you're identifying.
Thanks, Steve.
Any other questions out there?
No,
okay.
No other questions yet.
Okay, good. So let's look at limited clientele. When it comes to limited clientele, this is a specific group. There's 8 classifications. And what HUD has said and what they say in there, that the exclusively benefited clientele are generally presumed by HUD to be principally low moderate income. And the presumption is that when it comes to abused children, elderly persons, battered spouses, homeless persons, illiterate adults, persons living with AIDS, migrant farm workers, and those adults severely disabled by definition, that the presumption is 51% of those in each classification is low moderate income. That's the presumption. So it's not 100% exclusively, it's 51%. And the reason that's important is because there's a measurement that you will undertake when you submit the number of beneficiaries under limited clientele. There's also census data that can be accessed, which I'm not going to go into detail for that unless Rebecca wants to. There's also the factor dependent upon the opportunity that you're working with, that there's a history of those persons that, for example, elderly and severely disabled adults that participate in whatever activities take place within that facility or within that area. And in most cases, that falls under the removal of barriers and those architectural features that prohibit accessibility, which ties into ADA, the Americans Disability Act. Anything you want to add to that, Rebecca?
Not yet. So I guess I do. So what kind of activities do you see often funded with limited clientele that meet, that serve these populations, Steve?
For the most part, we see those activities that deal with infrastructure and public facilities that are renovations. In other words, they're changing the features of entering and exiting a building. They're changing the hallways, making adjustments. They're changing up the seating arrangements. They're changing and making restrooms accessible for the elderly and especially those that are severely disabled adults. So those fall in a number of projects that we would look to undertake. It might be, for example, a number of tourism projects that we undertake that deal with removal of materials and architectural barriers that meet this classification under limited clientele. There's public facility projects that will meet that test. Um, the key is, for example, you could have a library. We'll talk later about ineligible and eligible activities. For example, and this has happened, we funded projects where the local unit of government, for example, the city hall, county courthouse, didn't meet ADA requirements or accessibility. So county courthouses, I know of two we funded at least for elevators in order for persons to be able to actually go to the floor. There's accommodations that can be met by the local unit of government to provide those services, but those accommodations must be reasonable in terms, so you wouldn't move an entire office from the second floor to the first floor or the third to the first to serve a few people. What you would do is you provide that opportunity for those persons to actually go to that office to whatever they need to do in a county courthouse, unless it's located on the first floor. We've funded a number of accessibility ramps into facilities. If you look at infrastructure, walkability, it's making curb cuts, for example, accessible for those persons that are visually impaired, those persons that are bound to a wheelchair to be able to cross those streets in a fashion. We've done a number of improvements in the downtowns that have dealt with removal of barriers, because one of the items is the pathway. So if you have a number of obstructions within a pathway for persons to be able to clearly travel, that's an issue also. Over the years, I would say the other one we've dealt with funding a couple projects that dealt with shelters, battered spouses, where they took in those persons that were impacted in that area. But I can't recall anyone other than that we've actually dealt with directly. So those are some very clear examples. The key thing on limited clientele, especially, we're not talking about building new. You can talk about reconstruction, replacement of facilities, which we've done on tourism on fairgrounds, for example. But so if you have a restroom facility that needs to be reconstructed to meet ADA, that's okay. But if you have and are building a new building as a public facility, a library, and you want to qualify it under LMC because you must meet ADA requirements, that doesn't fit the test in terms of benefit for limited clientele, because it's the removal of the barriers.
Yeah, and that's just for removal of architectural barriers. Now, if you were building a brand new homeless shelter or a brand new senior center, that would be eligible for brand new activities. So just want to clarify that we do build new, but not for the removal of architectural barriers.
Right.
So if you have an activity that is only serving, let's say, elderly persons, we're building a senior center, HUD is assuming that 51% off the bat for elderly persons are low to moderate income. So usually what folks provide to us are census information identifying the number of elderly people within the community, and then we take that number and times it by 51% to figure out how many people will be benefiting from there. So that's kind of how we figure out the number there. There are other ways to qualify under LMC, and we'll go to the next slide. With that in mind, so if one of our eligible activities, we'll touch upon this later in the presentation, is a daycare facility. You can only qualify for a daycare facility under the LMC National Objective. And as you can tell, a daycare facility serves more people than the list here. So if you did want to build a daycare facility, you would just need to require information on family size and income for everybody coming in, and you would need to ensure that everyone being served by that daycare facility, at least 51% are low moderate income folks. So we've funded, I think, 2 daycare facilities in the last couple of years now. So please be aware of that. That is something we can do. Be of such a nature and in such a location that it might be recently be concluded that the activities clientele will primarily be LMI. We use this option very rarely in the non-entitlement area. So that's not one we normally use. Steve, can you think of any? To my knowledge, Steve has been with the agency for, I think, over 30 years. So he has seen a lot of different projects come in. I don't believe we've funded any under limited clientele through that reference there.
We made the attempt. Yeah, we made the attempt to qualify it that way, and HUD turned it down. The key thing here is the examples usually given is that if you're doing a child development center that's actually within the, say, a housing complex that is low moderate income, then that usually is going to be, you're usually going to be able to identify that the nature of that location, because the housing authority and such has a number of families that need childcare development, and those persons are low moderate income. That's usually the easiest way to do it, and that's not common within many of our communities. So we stay away from that one.
Steve, we did receive a question regarding daycare facilities on the service at 51% LMI families. Is that in perpetuity, or is there a period of years applicable? So from my knowledge point, and please correct me if I'm wrong, normally it's for 5 years. Steve, do you want to add any additional information?
There's a regulation that deals with use, and when it comes to, say, a daycare or a senior center or a community center or whatever that source, whatever that activity is funded, when that grant is closed out, then that property must stay with that use and meet that national objective. If not, then there's a payback clause based upon how you prorate the value, but it's not in forever, but there is a statement, and then we measure that over time to make sure that that actually happens before we close out the project. So there is a 5-year use piece with regards to reusing that facility or that property. So, for example, if you came in and said, we're doing a senior center, and then you finished the project and it really wasn't a senior center, it was a community center, then that local unit of government has an extreme problem. Or if we fund a project that's multi-use, multi meaning part of it's eligible and part of it's ineligible. So we fund a project where the building is the fire station, and then part of it is the local unit of government's clerk's office. And then we find out that the entire building becomes a municipal facility, say for their utilities department, then there's a major issue. Or the same if you would house some part of your local unit of government into your library. So there's a 5-year reuse piece. And if you want, we can find the regulatory piece and provide that to you if you give us information on who you are, and if you want to just send an email to.
Before we move on to the next national objective, I just wanted to highlight the HUD exchange here and the CPD income eligibility calculator and income limits. So a couple slides ago, Steve referenced income limits and how that all works. So first off, we have CDBG income limits. And when we click on this, these are effective beginning July 1, 2020. We get an Excel spreadsheet. And not sure where my Excel document went. Okay. So hopefully everybody can see this. It's very hard to read the Excel spreadsheet for CDBG income limits. I'm not sure why HUD provides us it in an Excel format. So what we usually do is we recommend for folks to use the home income limits. They use the exact same calculation for income limits there. And I'll just show you those real quick. So we have home income limits here, and this shows all the states. And you can select your state that you wish and then hit go. And we have our 2020 income limits there. So they look like this when we click into it. So let's use Adams County. So as you recall, 51% of the beneficiaries of the activity need to be low moderate income. So we identify low moderate income as 80% AMI. So for Adams County here, 80% AMI falls under this low income. So for one person to qualify, they would need to have an income of $40,850 or less to be considered a beneficiary of that activity. So does that all make sense to everybody here? And you base it off of family size. So if you're a family of 5, you would need to have an income of $63,000 or less to qualify and be able to meet that LMC national objective piece. So hopefully that all makes sense. This is just a little bit easier format. You can print this off and use it when you are income qualifying individuals for the LMC national objective. So if you have a daycare and you're serving multiple income levels, you normally have an intake form and you have folks identify their income level, and so then you can determine if they're above or below. Steve, do you want to add anything else to this?
Yeah, as Rebecca said, the income limits, you'll notice they're by county. And you also want to make sure that when you're doing that, if your service area is outside of one county, that you're dealing with income limits within those counties that those individuals reside. So if you had a daycare and that daycare served a number of families, individual children, those taking care of, and they're in different counties, you're going to measure it differently according to that county.
Yeah, so it's the county that the family resides in. So if you, and I don't believe Antelope and Adams County are anywhere near each other, but for the sake of the presentation, you'll notice that 80% for a 5-person family is 61,900. So it is a little bit different, and you base it off of the family's residence.
So when you get into economic development projects, those opportunities there, and you're talking about jobs, persons do travel, as we all do, well, except right now I don't travel very far to work. Uh, then you'll have to make sure that you have available so that they can identify their county of residence and that they'll be able to select from that county on an intake, whether it's, say, a daycare, child development center, or if it happens to be an economic development project that services those persons are, say, attending their workforce is from larger than just the county that the business is located in. Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's very helpful when that we display, and Rebecca has that ability to do that, to show you where to go and why we need to do it that way. So we'll talk about housing, and there was a question earlier. It's based upon the household. So every unit that receives financial benefit from CDBG must meet the low moderate income household benefit test. So the income qualifier, the eligibility, is based upon that household. It's not, for example, 51% of the units that are rehabbed. It's each unit has to meet the test. And if you're involved in housing, worked in housing, sometimes that's difficult in communities because, one, when it comes to our owner occupied rehab, you have to find those persons that are willing to apply. You also have to make sure that they're willing to meet and bring that unit up to standard if that's what's required. And they also have to income qualify at that time. So it's not always easy when it comes to, for example, the owner occupied rehab where this test comes into place. So it's based upon household and the occupancy of that household. So when you measure the number of persons residing in that household and you have questions, let us know. We've had cases where persons live there, but they claimed they didn't live there. They were just, let's say, spending some time there. But we look at who resides in terms of occupancy, whether it's an individual, say, for example, senior citizen, elderly individual, one person, or whether it's a family of 10, or whether it's actually a larger family in terms of the number of persons that are residing within that household. So it's an income qualifier. So there'll be just reading through this. Okay. As you go through this, there's agreement between the grantee and the landlord. So in terms of record keeping requirements, total cost of activities, CDBG and non-CDBG, household size and household income for each unit claimed. There's rental information provided here, but we do owner occupied rehab, single family. It's ownership. We're not looking at rentals at this time within the program. So those are examples also of what you would do if we would have, and we're working with assisting the property owner that rents to a tenant. So the key thing is the income qualify the occupants of that household based upon the data that Rebecca showed you with regards to those income limits. That's fixed.
So I did just want to highlight one other area within HUD Exchange. They do have an income eligibility calculator, and it's been a while since I ran this. You do need to create a login account. Everybody should do this and sign up for email notifications of when HUD releases additional guidance. So if you learn one thing today that you should do, hopefully one is to create an account on the HUD Exchange. So with the CPD income eligibility calculator, they do allow you to walk through on enrolling, seeing if someone is qualified for it. So I began these a while ago, but it walks you through each person. You can talk about, select the national objective you're trying to meet. And then I believe we identify the number of individuals. So I created the beneficiary member ID, and it walks you through everything of like questions you need to be aware of. And then we select Arthur County. 80% is our income limit, so that's $56,000 for them. So just kind of walking through it, it's a tool that I don't use very often, but I know folks that are certified administrators do use it, and we can give you additional information. There is a user manual here. The 2020 income limits haven't been added into it yet, but if you're creating a process for enrolling individuals into a CDBG activity such as LMH or LMC, this might be a tool you want to use so you're consistent in making sure you're asking all those questions of their annual income. So, great.
So as a follow-up to what Rebecca highlighted, which is extremely valuable, when you look at low moderate income based upon households and qualifying that, there's a number of factors that play a role in there in terms of what their income is. It's not just looking at what was displayed earlier in terms of by county, by number of persons. It's also figuring actually what income they receive, whether that's from a place of employment, whether that's from Social Security benefits, and a number of other factors that would figure into their income as you go through income eligibility for each applicant that would and is wanting to apply for assistance for housing rehab. So, okay, let's talk about jobs. In most cases, when we get into the national objective for jobs, we're speaking of those activities based upon job creation or retention. And we're looking at jobs held by or made available to low moderate income persons as a fallback. What you want to make sure as you're working through this process to have an understanding as you develop an application, what is the base level of employment by that business? So we need to know, the department will ask that question. So if you have a company, what at the present time are you working with in terms of the number of employees that business has? So if they have a base of 20, then we're looking at how and what you would do in terms of the number of jobs you would create above that 20. Or if you're talking about retention, we're looking at the number of jobs that would be lost based upon that 20. Jobs held by or made available to, it's another means to say qualify. under the low moderate income for jobs, but it takes a very solid record keeping arrangement with regards to how you make those available to what types of services that would be offered for persons to apply for those positions. You also look at the types of positions with regards to what is required in terms of skills, ability, and education. So the department will have an agreement with the business on the number of jobs to be created or retained, and that percentage of those that must meet the low moderate income benefit test. And the same with all national objective is, if not met, then that local unit of government is placed in a position to pay back those funds. So if you're working with a business, a nonprofit, uh, you need to make sure that there's an understanding between those, that if the business, the for-profit, or if the nonprofit doesn't meet the test as far as national objective, you want to have an arrangement, whether it's a memorandum of understanding, so that they do know that they owe with regards to the payback of the funds. Job creation records are very important, especially at the time of hire or the time of when you're looking at retention or jobs to be lost. So they need to make sure that those records are there. And usually what happens, they do that as an intake. The HR, the human resources for that business, whoever that may be, will do the intake and ask the questions of that applicant to identify where they fall with regards to number of persons within their household, what their income is, are they above or below that, in what county of residence. Also, it's skills required if you're doing first consideration for hiring, and job retention and permanent job loss. There are some very specific requirements that that business must make in terms of notification that they're going to lay off personnel, those workers within that business.
Hey, Steve.
Yes.
Let's just walk through this because LMJ is very complicated because there's two different ways for people to qualify. So normally the easiest way that we normally fund applications for, but not the only way, is through creation of jobs. So if we have a business in Adams County and they have an applicant and they're wanting to create 5 new jobs with our CDBG funding. So that means 3 of those jobs have to go to low moderate income folks. And if I'm saying something wrong, Steve, please interject. So at the time of application, that business will need to determine how much was the household income of that individual before they're hiring. So if I am a person who's applying for this job and I'm a family of 5, I need to indicate if I currently have an annual income of above 63,000 or below 63,000. That is one thing. So if I'm above it, I would not meet that LMJ requirement of, I'd fall into that number of jobs, those 2 jobs being made available for that are above the 51% out of 5. So, but if I'm below it, I would count for it. So this would be something that you do. So we do have, do you want to talk, Steve is the expert on LMJ, much more so than me. But so at the time of application, we are trying to indicate that they are low moderate income. That does not mean that the job they are going into needs to keep them into that low moderate income job level. So they can become higher paid, if that makes sense.
Well,
do you want to add clarification?
Sure. at the time of hire, if it's creation of jobs on the intake, which those questions are asked, they don't submit documentation, but they fill out a form uh, that identifies, as you look at this illustration, how many persons are in your household, and based upon the number of persons, uh, where does your income fall, above or below this level? And of course, they look at which county before they begin that process. Um, in terms of the jobs, we look at the job descriptions. So depending upon the job description that you would have, in some cases, the business has jobs available that in a lot of cases, that individual would not be low moderate income qualified. Now, that business could provide, for example, training opportunities um, for that individual coming in. So if it requires a number of persons that have education, such as masters, PhDs, or they have those positions that require certain skills and trades. Now, that doesn't mean that a person that's out of work wouldn't qualify at the time as being low moderate income, because some people have been out of work now for a considerable amount of time. So it's just that, as Rebecca said, it's the test at the time of hire. It's to put that person hopefully in a position where they do earn more money than they are making now. It's not to place them in a position where they're low moderate income in terms of the actual take home pay that they receive. So, and that test is also based upon the number of persons and the overall income within that household. There's another
And then Steve,
test. There's another test too that I don't know if we're getting into that one, but there's also a public benefit test in terms of how much can be invested in a business when you look at the economic development opportunity. So the
and
making available too, you have to really track that deliberately, and hopefully those types of jobs and the job descriptions provided give an opportunity to persons uh, to fill those that don't have all the skills and education that some would have in other types of positions. So,
and
okay,
then
Rebecca.
Steve, do you want to talk about how a business and local unit of government, if they want to qualify under the LMJ national objective through retention, how would they go about that?
Well, if you're talking about assisting in a business, for example, the business needs assistance because they want to retain jobs, then they need to make sure that they're going to notify their employees that they're laying people off, or they're going to do a public notice that identifies that this business is no longer going to employ a number of persons. So there's um, very specific language for retention. So if you're looking at job retention, I would definitely talk to our staff with regards to that, whether it's Tom Stevens or Dave Hans on our side. And if you're working in the field, you can always communicate with field service too, that can forward some information. But yeah, job retention, they just can't say we have a problem. We might not be able to employ all these people anymore. So I need some working capital to keep my business running. And no, it's very specific. And then there is some
And then,
anti-pirating legislation too, in terms of moving businesses from one state to another, but that's more specific.
and then Steve, do they need to income qualify all the jobs that they're trying to retain?
Yes.
So all the current employees would need to fill out a questionnaire identifying the number of persons in their family and then they would need to also identify their household income.
Yeah, they would need
to
they would need to do the same as if at the time of hire. So those persons, if they're looking at they're going to lay off X number of persons, and they'd have to make sure that the positions they're laying off tie into low moderate income too.
Okay. So I'm not seeing any questions yet, so we'll move on to the next slide.
Okay, slum and blight. Prevention and elimination of slum and blight is very specific. There's two areas. It's on an area basis where you are looking to eliminate those signs of slum and blight in a defined area, which is a border. So you identify an area and you can only undertake specific activities in that area. Spot basis is limited to, say, for example, a specific building that's not within a designated area. So you can't overlay a spot basis in an area basis. Say, for example, they want to, which in normal cases we don't, but you could be demolishing a building and then reconstructing on that site, say a public library. But if it's in an area basis, it'd have to be based upon an area basis in terms of qualifying under the national objective and filling out that exhibit that meets that. Okay, let's go. Definitions, specifics on an area basis, the way the regulatory aspect is, it's a 10-year renewal piece. So it has to be one officially designated by the local unit of government. And usually that's through the Community Development Act, state of Nebraska. And every 10 years it has to be reevaluated. So what HUD is saying that you need to look at and you need to be making improvements to that blighted area, local unit of government. We're not just letting it go. So every 10 years. So if you're not sure that the local unit of government has passed a review of that designation, ask them to see what their records are, and you may want to just do that if they don't have records that cover that part of it. So it's a 10-year period. They need to address those specific items that are going to reduce the conditions of that area. And then on a spot basis, as mentioned, it's outside of that designated area. And it's very specific because it's only limited. You can't do everything. You can only do acquisition, clearance, relocation, historic preservation. And principally, it's rehabilitation of buildings within that area. And usually within an area basis, it deals with public safety. Go ahead, Rebecca.
So just to clarify, for area basis, we normally, within our funding opportunities, we offer in local units of government to qualify under slum and blight through the downtown revitalization grant. And so that's often when they use area basis. Now, for spot basis, normally it's within our potentially tourism development, but spot basis is very rare in our program. Normally it's area basis. Does anyone have any questions on prevention and elimination of slum and blight? Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions. So we're going to take like a 10-minute break. So we will reconvene at 10:45. We'll just put a pause on everything, and then everybody can get some more coffee, some breakfast, and go from there. So please join us in about at 10:45. Just checking audio and making sure Steve is back. Steve, are you able to hear us and speak? Steve might not be back out of his chair yet, so we'll wait a couple more minutes. Steve, are you back at your desk? Can you hear us okay? Welcome back, Steve.
Are we ready to go again?
We are. I did just want to highlight to everybody our CDBG application guidelines for 2020. And we just got done talking about slum and blight, and I wanted to make everybody aware of the provision of how slums and blight are defined. These are actually in the Nebraska state statutes. And if you want to look them up, you can take a search for these items here. So we do define all of our national objectives in our CDBG application guidelines also. So if you are working on applying for a project this year, please take a look at the application guidelines that we made available. So Steve, if you want to kick us off on urgent need. And one thing before you start is we should take off that note not used in Nebraska. That is no longer true. And Steve, if you want to provide some background.
Well, what it says is Nebraska is not used. So we continue to use it. In the past, urgent need has been a very difficult national objective to meet because of the nature of it. If you look at the criteria, a serious immediate threat to health and welfare within 18 months, the community has no other resources or is unable to access other resources to carry out that activity. Several years past, we used urgent need when it came to water quality in the state of Nebraska. And HUD informed us that we could not do that since there was not an immediate urgent need within 18 months. The water quality issue had gone on for a number of years. So the urgent need has been put into place in the emergent threat opportunity for those communities that could identify solutions to problems caused by the flooding from 2019, or they may have other situations that were of immediacy within 18 months that pose a threat to the public and unable to finance. So it's one of those items that mainly relate to disaster. And in some cases, you may think that the activity you're applying for because of a disaster falls under the urgent need criteria, but just to fix an item doesn't do it. It needs to be an item that is also in a position where it's a public safety issue. So if you had a tornado come through a community and some of the structures left were unsafe within that community, in other words, a threat to those persons that were walking by beneath, and they might collapse on them, then you would probably have an urgent need to remove that or make changes to that structure so that it would be safe with regards to public benefit. So that's one example. So that's what urgent need is in terms of the criteria. So it also is difficult because we have a 70% test with low moderate income benefits. So we have funded under emergent threat applicants for solutions to the problems caused by the Midwest floods in Nebraska. especially along the Platte River. So in Dodge County and Fremont, and also flooding that took place out in Wood River, Nebraska, that came under and qualified as an urgent need. Anything you want to add, Rebecca?
Yeah, so these criteria here, we in Nebraska did not make these up. These are federal criteria that we need to adhere to anytime we are funding projects that meet the urgent need national objective. The other item that I want to make everyone aware of, we have a limited amount of funding to provide 2 projects underneath the urgent need national objective. And our annual action plan, Todd each year asks us the question, how much money are we dedicating or potentially like saving to be used during our program year towards the national objective urgent need. And for the 2020 year, same as we did for 2019, we have identified that up to 1.5 million would be made available for activities that fall under the urgent need national objective. So as Steve noted, the only funding opportunity that folks can qualify under this national objective is underneath the emergent threat funding opportunity, and the maximum amount of grant award under that category, I believe, is $485,000. So that means at most we could fund 3 projects at the maximum amount during the program year. So if there is any way that you have a project that can fall underneath the other 2 national objectives, please go with that route first. This is really a last effort for you to solve the issue at hand. Another thing, when we see applications come in for pre-applications underneath the emergent threat funding opportunity, is when people are answering the question, community must be unable to finance activity on its own, other funding sources must not be available to carry out activity. The only statement we're getting from applicants is that basically a statement from the mayor or the county commissioner stating, here's our budget, we have no money. That's not sufficient. That's just one piece of it. You also need to identify the other funding sources you reached out to and they said you did not qualify for their funding. We need to know that we are literally, this is the last resort of funding for you to address the serious and immediate threat. So FYI on that. So does anyone want to put into the chat message or the Q&A a national objective? Awesome, Don Kimmel, you are quick. You have named each one of the national objectives. Thank you. We know you are on the call. Another item for CDBG national objectives, the unit of local government is contractually responsible for activities funded with CDBG to meet the designated national objective and complete the activities as approved and awarded by the state. So just like Steve said at the beginning of his presentation, you need to be able to meet that national objective throughout the life of the grant. And so please understand the project activities and ensure they are eligible activities and meet the CDBG national objective. So that's something that we test for throughout the life of the project. Okay, survey methodology. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, and I'm kind of thinking that we're going to need to have another webinar on this because it's a fairly big topic. So as you may recall, we talked about meeting low to moderate income on a national area benefit. And I showed you guys this lovely spreadsheet, and we had the city of Alma that they want to build a library, and that's a activity that qualifies under LMA. And they went to this resource and they found out that they are below 51% here. So they're wondering, hey, what else can we do? Like, are we just out of luck? No. The city of Alma could disagree with this and say, we think the HUD data is not accurate representation of what's going on in our community. And maybe your community has had several layoffs going on, maybe a business moved out, maybe there was a natural disaster that occurred that changed your population makeup and their income levels. So that's when you can conduct an income survey. So it's a little bit lengthy process, and you are taking a chance on, because you may conduct the income survey and find that the data doesn't get you to be 51%. So just an FYI. Or you could be implementing a project where the service area is outside of the local unit of government jurisdiction. So maybe it's serving more people. So we see this oftentimes with fire stations. Maybe the fire station is serving 3 communities. And so then you would need to do an income survey of the entire area. So please note, it all kind of depends on your activity and the service area. You need to be able to define what these are. So I believe I've covered this already, but if you guys think I need to expand a little bit more, let me know. So we need to use the LMI data to the fullest extent feasible. And then service area, target area may not always conform to the census block or tract groups, especially with cases including public improvements, public facilities. So again, take a look at your activity you want to be doing and identifying who will be served by that activity. And then lay it over the current jurisdiction of the community, and then also the and then maybe see if it falls under the census tract map. So there are several resources available for this. We talk about 24 CFR 570, talks about being methodologically sound, and all steps must be documented. Within our website, I'll pull that up quick. And in your manuals, we have a grant administration. Appendix 1 talks about LMA national objectives. And so the CPD 14-013 talks about the methodology, and then CPD notice 19-02 was updated, and they made some edits to the methodology and how you conduct your income survey. So they added a component here that moving forward, anything after April 1st, 2019 needs to follow all the parameters within the CPD notice. I recommend you read this before saying, let's do an income survey. And the other item that we do provide is we do provide guidance on conducting an income survey. Here, this is information that we put together as the state. The CPD notices are directly from HUD. And we did include a survey sample form that you guys can copy information and use within communities, and you'll notate that income limits here, you would need to go to the HUD exchange, this website, identify your county, this area that within your service area that you're surveying folks and identify the low income. So you would use, for Adams County, 40,850. I just lost that. Would go into right here, 40,850, and then you would send out the survey and folks would indicate if they are above or below. So this is kind of what we were talking about earlier in the national objective. So we need to make sure that your survey is conducted properly. So you need to document every single step within your survey methodology. And they are conducted on families, not households. So a family is defined as a single person or a group of persons residing together regardless of actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. Refer to that CPD notice that I spoke of. There are two types of surveys. So first off, everyone here will identify their project, then identify the service area that their project is serving. So if your service area has 200 households or fewer, you would be doing a census survey. And this is where you would have everyone within your service area complete a survey. Now, if you do determine your service area and it is more than 200 households, then you are just doing a sample of within your service area, and you need to make sure that you're getting a good location. So if you are doing a random sample survey, you would need to make sure that place dots on a map to make sure you are surveying everyone in the community. And then make sure those are not just like in one corner, so that you're actually getting a good representation. We did receive a question, can more than one family be in the same household? Potentially, yes. So you could have, trying to think of an example right now. I believe if I was living in my house with my family and then my sister, or I'm renting out a portion of my house to another person unrelated, then that extra person would be another household. So it potentially, yes, and it really just depends. And I wish I had a better example than that one. I kind of just made that up. So if anybody has a better example, let me know. Or Steve, do you know of a better example?
Or you're talking of more than one household?
One family and the same household.
Well, because of the economic conditions at this point, I could see where there would be more than one family in a household, especially if they were related or not related. I mean, one family on one floor and one family on another floor are sharing accommodations. And it would depend upon I mean, you could have the parents having a family living with them that needed accommodations. If you're talking about two families within a household.
Yeah. So I think it kind of could fall into maybe maybe your parents move in, that would be one family, and then you're one family. So it really depends on the situation. And if you guys come up to those situations, feel free to contact us. We're happy to look into it. So I think I jumped the gun a little bit on service area, so I apologize. So thank goodness for PowerPoint slides. So the service area is the area that will benefit from the completion of the CDBG project. You may use already identified boundaries, such as natural boundaries, the rivers, and/or man-made boundaries, streets, railroads. So overall, you need to identify the service area. This is something that the applicant needs to determine. We at the state can't determine it. You need to identify how you came up with the service area. This helps you determine the type of income survey to be used, and then you can conduct an income survey. So we do have a sample questionnaire survey form for you guys. Oftentimes, folks pair the income survey with the community needs assessment survey. So you're getting additional information from your community for what they think needs to be updated within the community. So, and just remember, if it's under 200 households, then the census survey will need to be completed, and that's every resident. And then random would be a sample size with an oversample. So we'll go into that in a couple more slides, I believe. And then you'll need to publicize the survey and conduct the survey, analyze the results, document your results. Feel free to contact us during this process. The first one, I think, is always the hardest. And then after that, you get better. So please avoid bias throughout the process. While developing the questionnaire and instrument, publicizing or advertising. So please don't publicize, and I don't know if we get to this later on, that this is for the community development block grant application. That creates bias in there that this is for low moderate income folks. So just an FYI, be careful about your publicizing. I think we have a slide later on, and while collecting your data and analyzing. So we have some key terms that we'll be talking about this throughout here is margin of error. This is something new. This came out in that CPD notice from 2019. This tells you how many percentage points your results could differ from the real value. Confidence level tells you how sure you are that your estimate falls within your confidence interval. And confidence interval is related to the margin of error and confidence level. It tells you how much uncertainty there is within this statistic. So please follow, if you guys are wondering about this margin of error piece, let me bring that up real quick. Not sure if I still have it. So this is the link that you would click on to determine what is the ACS data on your current community. And then this is your margin of error for places. So these work well together. Please open both of them when you are determining if you should be doing an income survey. So then our village of Elmo, I think Elma, sorry, I mispronounced. It has a margin of error of 7.30 of either being above or below. So you might have a good chance of being above 51%. This figure comes into play when you are doing your income survey. I'm guessing that you would be doing a census income survey for Alma since it only has a population of 1140. But if you were in the city of Columbus and you are providing a service for everybody, then you would be doing a random sample survey, and this is where that margin of error would come into place more heavily. So not sure if my links will work. So we do have links within all of our guidance to help you get started. So we would identify the population size of the community. So let's say it's 5,200 and we want a confidence level of 95, and we'll use our margin of error of 7.3% from ALMA. So then our sample size here would be 175. So we would need to ensure that we had 175 surveys completed for this. That makes sense. So there are some lovely tools out there for all of you to use to help you complete an income survey. We also have, let's see if this link works. And it did not. So I will get to that later on in the presentation. So we do have 14013, 19, and all these two are in your manuals and online. And then we created a policy memo on how we interpreted the CPD notice 19-02. Trying to think here. I'm going over this very quickly. I think we'll probably host a separate webinar and make it available to everybody to go over income surveys, because I feel like I'm going super quickly. But does anyone have any questions so far? So we have the question, is this info in the manual? I'm not seeing it other than appendices. We primarily put it into the appendices. All the information on income surveys goes in one spot to make it a little bit easier for you folks. Within our manual, we do have our survey methodology. I recommend reading through this and walking through it for your type of community you are working with. And it goes over everything here. So I'll make this a little bit bigger. So they identified their service area right here, and then if you are doing, we don't do survey businesses, so you would take those organizations off before mailing out your survey. Usually folks use their utility list of who gets sent information off of there. So that's a common list. And then we do have income limits here. We provide a link for data for applicants to get to here from, let's see here. So if you are doing income limits, you would use this link. And if you just went to opportunity.nebraska.gov/data, you'll get to this page. So we just had a question come in. So if a community does not meet 51% threshold, and they're applying for an emergent threat, would they need to do an income survey to try and qualify? So if it depends on their activity. So if they're trying to meet the national objective of LMA, they would need to do an income survey. But if they were trying to meet the national objective through SLO and blight, maybe, they could come underneath that. Or if they could come under urgent need. So, or they overall, give us a call if you have questions, if your project, your service area does not line up with the community and the community does not fall over 51%, and we can kind of walk you through it. I'm happy to help with that. So here's another area where you use these numbers for if you guys have questions, feel free to send it to both Steve and myself. That would be great. But overall, this guidance that we provided you guys should walk you through it. overall. So when you're filling out the competence level, you'll use 90%, and then you enter the number of families, and you could potentially get that from your utility list, potentially. And we talk you through everything here. So let's see. So then this is the link that didn't work off of my PowerPoint. So you can do the random. If for a random sample survey, we do have guidance here, and the link does work in this document. You identify the sample size. Usually it's 20% is the sample size over sample. So if they told you up here that it's 71, they are doing 86, so a few more extra there. And then you identify a number range, and it provides you a list of random results. So you'll be sending surveys to the first 71 folks here, and then sending over sample to the folks 72 through 86 here. So we'll walk you through it. I'm happy to help folks as we go through this. It helps when we're working with a real project and not talking in hypotheticals like we are right now. But yeah, so great. So Steve, was there anything else you wanted to add to it, that?
No.
Okay. And again, we'll look into hosting a separate webinar and making it available, or finding some HUD videos. I believe they have them available to maybe walk you through the income survey a little bit more in detail. I did a quick overview, and I apologize for that. I just want to make sure we're done by noon for all of your guys' time. Registrations. There are a couple different registrations. The first one primarily is the System Awards Management, commonly known as SAM. So some background information on that registration portal is basically it was developed in 2012, and it combined eight other databases into one system. So we've issued guidance on the use of the System for Awards Management, and our most current one is Policy Memo 18-02, and that is on our website. And if you guys have any questions, feel free. I can show you where that is on our website. So SAM, you can access SAM. It's available to everybody. Is sam.gov. Overall, you are making sure that folks that are applying for CDBG funds are active and registered and are authorized to receive funding from the federal government. So you have to be active every year that you are receiving grant funds. So the quickest way for you guys to do this is first do a search within sam.gov to see if you are eligible, if you are in the system. So for an example, I reused slides from last year and I didn't update our screenshot. So we are active, FYI. So I did a search for economic development for our state, and it does say that we are good to go. We are active. We're in here. Our expiration date says 5/27/2020. So last year we were able to receive CDBG funds from the federal government, and usually when local units of government are applying for our funding opportunities, they do need to make sure that they are active and registered. It is a requirement. We cannot award anyone with CDBG funds if they are not active and registered within SAM. And I'm talking about those local units of government right now in this presentation. So how you can check if you are registered, you can do a check status too. And so if you know your DUNS number, you can click search it there, and it should come up with a lovely checkboxes. So this shows that we are good to go. We actually need both this screen and this screen. Yeah. So, and I can do a quick demo of where this is all at for folks. So some other results that could come up is no results. So for a local unit of government, this would be an issue. We would not be able to award funding to them. Excluded. So let's pretend that this person is a local unit of government. If we get this in the search box, this means that we could not award funding to this local unit of government. Just an FYI. So, and nobody, like Eric Lindsay didn't register himself to be on the exclusion list. Like federal entities add you onto the exclusion list. So just an FYI. I don't think anyone would want to add themselves on there. So if you guys have questions on using sam.gov or you're trying to help a local unit of government to get registered, you can always reach out to Nebraska Business Development Center. They have staff on board that can assist, especially if there are weird situations. We had one local unit of government last year that had a community here in Nebraska, but they were registered under a Michigan address. It was really weird, and it took a lot of work to get it fixed, I believe. So just an FYI, making sure you always want to double check that that address is good to go. And then, so we had different policies in the past. Our most recent and our active policy right now is currently effective. We released it through a policy memo July 1st of 2018 on who needs to be registered and active in SAM. So these are the folks that need, when I search in sam.gov, I should be seeing an entry in there for them showing that they are good to go. So now everybody remember what the colors all mean. Red equals registered and active in SAM. White equals you need to search in SAM to verify that the entity does not have an active exclusion. And blue is individual and no search is required. Okay, so we'll go through some examples here. So if you are constructing a library, who do you need to check in sam.gov? So you would need to have the local unit of government to be active and registered in SAM. And so when you do the search, you should be printing off those 2 pages that I told you about and making sure that's active for every year that you're receiving CDBG funds. So a local unit of government may contract with a general administrator to oversee the CDBG regulations. So normally they hire a certified administrator, which you guys will all hopefully become at the end of this webinar series. They would need to double check and make sure that you guys are not barred from receiving federal money. The local unit of government, if they're hiring a contractor, they would need to do a search within the system to make sure that contractor is not able to receive federal funds. And same with all the subcontractors. So you would need to document that you did do that search within sam.gov to make sure that they are not disqualified. I would also search by the entity's business owner to make sure that owner didn't just create a brand new business. So and then maybe they were disqualified underneath a different business name and attached to that. So do your due diligence in making sure that you are only providing funding to those folks that are good with handling federal money and have not abused it in some way. So if you were doing commercial rehab, we haven't gotten to this activity very much because primarily in downtown revitalization when we are updating the outer portion of the facility. So the local unit of government would need to be checked in SAM, and they would need to show that there is an active registration within SAM. They would need to print out those 2 pages. They would also have to do it for each of the businesses they are providing funding to for that facade reconstruction on there for commercial rehab. So they would need to have that printed off, and those businesses would need to be registered. Same as before, general administrator and all the contractors, you are just making sure that they are not barred from receiving federal funding. So you're making sure you've done your search, you've looked for the individual, you've looked for the owner, you looked for the company name, and then just print off all those results. So then you're in the clear. And you want to do this before you enter into contract. For us at the state level, before we enter into contract with the local unit of government, we double check that you are active and registered and everything's good to go. So owner-occupied rehabilitation. So again, local unit of government has to be active and registered. You need to search for the general administrator and the housing management contractors. Also, who you don't need to search for is the homeowner. This is an individual, so it's not required for you to do that. Child care center, again, local unit of government here, and then also the nonprofit daycare would need to be reviewed to make sure they are active and registered within the system. For-profit business, we would need the for-profit business to be active and registered also, and everybody else you would check to make sure they are not barred from receiving federal money. So we also have a Nebraska Contractor Registration Act. This is a Nebraska specific. So all contractors doing business in Nebraska must register with the Nebraska Department of Labor. A contractor is any person who engages in the business of construction, includes subcontractors, general contractors, and any other person arranging for the performance of work on real property. So if you guys have questions, you should be making sure, double checking that that contractor that you're hiring for the construction work is registered because they should be following state rules. So as a CDBG administrator, you're making sure that your local unit of government that you're assisting is following both federal and state requirements. So this is a state requirement. And they're fairly good to get a hold of, those folks at Department of Labor. Any questions? Everybody's feeling good? Okay, I am going to turn it over to Steve to talk about eligible activities. Steve, you might be on mute. Oh,
no, I was on mute. Sorry.
No, you're good.
Okay, you left me 29 minutes. We want to talk about eligible activities. This is the second part of the fundability test. So all activities must be eligible for funding according to the Section 105A of the Housing and Community Development Act. The difference here is that on the fundability side, the eligible activities are listed in Section 105A of the Act. The national objective part of the fundability is listed in the regulations. So please don't look in the regs for the eligible activities. They're actually listed in the Housing and Community Development Act in Section 105A. And the fallback is that if it's not authorized in the Act, it's ineligible with a few exceptions. So they point those out. There are also defined HUD matrix codes that match the eligible activities to the national objective. And at some point, you would be seeing those when you do an opportunity for funding as an application. So we always have to line up matrix codes, the HUD matrix codes, with the eligible activities, and then they'll identify if it's possible or not, yes or no, and they'll say no if it meets a national objective. keep going. So quickly, I'll go through a listing of those categories of eligible activities. That doesn't mean under every opportunity that these are priorities. These are all eligible activities. The states have the ability within the regulatory portion and within the act to identify priorities for funding. So you have acquisition of real property, public utilities, privately owned, code enforcement, clearance, architectural barrier removal, and loss of rental income, disposition of real property, public services, payment of non-federal share, relocation, planning, capacity building, program admin costs. And there's a distinction between program admin costs and activity delivery cost. As we talked about, activities that can be carried through a nonprofit. There's neighborhood-based development organizations, which are actually, if you look at NDOs, that work with repurposing and program income conversion, energy efficiency, economic development assistance for profits, technical assistance, which the state provides, housing services, and going on. Microenterprise assistance, home ownership assistance, tornado safe shelters, and lead-based paint hazard evaluation and reduction. So some of you may have recognized a number of those activities. In the past, we've had those as priorities, and currently we may not. So it goes and ebbs and flows with the opportunities that we provide as we move forward through the years. Next. So we'll talk about program administration costs. Those funds may be used to pay reasonable program admin costs and charges related to planning and execution of the CDBG program, which the state does, and which we also allow the local unit of government to charge program admin costs with some fixed amounts that depend upon the opportunity. Okay, Rebecca, keep it going.
And I just want to also add, we have federal regulations. We have a cap on administration costs, so we do take a very close look at admin costs. So, so maybe that's why we don't offer as much administration funding available to folks. So just an FYI, there is a cap at the state level that even the locals feed into.
Yeah, there's a 20% cap that deals with general administration and planning, and that's why we differentiate when it comes to construction management and housing management, lead-based paint, because those do not fall under program administration. And then there's a number of other costs that are built into project delivery, which would be, for example, engineering, architectural costs, and other contracts specifically to the delivery of the project. So program management, coordination, monitoring, reporting, evaluation, these are the items that usually come under what are PACs, program administration costs. So if you're looking at what do you bill, you can bill staff and related costs, citizen participation costs, fair housing activities, record keeping, compliance, closeout. And so when you are awarded the local unit of government, it receives an approval and a contract goes out. There's special conditions that need to be met, which come under program admin costs too, which would be in your scope of services for your general administration contract. Okay, we could go eligible costs for implementing the project. So these are activity delivery costs, and there's a specific memo and notice that deals with and lays these out that HUD put out 2013, I believe. And it deals with implementation costs that can be charged of specific activities such as housing rehab, commercial rehab, and that staff time and travel and management. So if you're building a budget and you're working with that local unit of government, you want to make sure you distinguish between what are PACs for program administrative costs and then what you would classify as activity delivery costs that you would build into your project. So those are distinctions you'd want to make. Next. So we do have ineligible activities, as I mentioned before. If it's not mentioned as allowable, it's ineligible. Buildings for the general conduct of government. And there's some exceptions to those in special cases, but for most purposes, you're dealing with, we're not building new courthouses, we're not building new city halls, we're not building new utilities or county maintenance buildings or lots as such. So buildings that you can do that are for general conduct of government, you can do certain things I mentioned much earlier on. Removal of materials and architectural barriers that restrict mobility and accessibility, as we said. Elevators in a courthouse. Maybe the method for entering and leaving the city hall, how you're able to access services within that local unit of government building. Okay.
And with this example, they would qualify under the LMC national objective. So you would need to provide a census documentation identifying the number of severely disabled adults and elderly within the community who potentially could be using, needing access to those buildings for general conduct of government. And then 51% of those folks would need to be identified as low, moderate income.
And another exception is fire stations. And that also includes the firefighting equipment that is necessary for that firefighters to actually perform their duties. So you have the building, you have the trucks, you have the equipment necessary to meet the emergency needs for the fire department. And it's not everything that is on their wish list. So if you have questions about what fits, let us know. Prorating costs, yes?
We often get the question of, are new ambulances, is that an eligible activity?
Emergency medical, we have not financed ambulances over the years since I've been in the program.
Okay, so that's often a question we get from local units of government if CDBG funds can be used on purchasing new ambulances, and the federal regulations only identify fire stations and equipment. So usually that's why we have not funded ambulances in the past. So
even though even though they may be integral to that fire department and not separate under contract, we're financing investing in the firefighting equipment and the trucks, the buildings as allowable. Prorating costs for services and delivery and such, as mentioned earlier, you could have a structure where you're rehabbing that structure and it's definable to make a determination of, on a square foot basis, cost basis, this part is the fire department and this part is the municipal offices of that building. So we can do some prorating costs on buildings that depend upon the type of use. So if you would do a community center combination building, that would be the maintenance for that local unit of government, then we could prorate the structure in terms of the costs. Okay. Ineligible. So if you want to keep your grass short enough and say, for example, all your cars aligned in terms of the hitting those wheels and people not tripping on sidewalks, you need to do that yourself as a local government. There is a provision where if you were doing, which we don't finance, last resort, and if you were looking at housing and where you couldn't turn over a project, some maintenance can be done, but that doesn't fall into our program. You can't pay for your staff. that is not working directly with the CDBG program. So if you think you're going to pay the full salary of all your utility people within the city and the engineer or the clerk, and they don't touch CDBG or they hardly do, all they do is maybe some processing. No, you're not doing that. And plus you can't decide because the clerk or another person within that unit of government is going to be financed with CDBG, so you're going to give them a 20% merit increase. New housing construction, no. We can do reconstruction, which we've done in the past, where you rebuild on a site. In the footprint, there's last resort housing on relocation. That's something that we don't want to explore. Next. Repair, maintenance, and operating costs are ineligible, as we talked about, for general conduct of government. So if anybody asks you, how can I fix or maintain my building, or how can I pay for the operations, that's not an item we finance.
Steve, do you want to talk about equipment also?
Does that come up later in the slides?
I don't think so.
Oh, you don't? Okay. We do have several questions that come with applications or prior to when we do some technical assistance about the purchasing of equipment. For one, under economic development, if a business needs certain specific equipment to operate and produce a product, which results in job retention or creation, we can assist in financing that equipment purchase. If it's equipment or furnishings that are not an integral part of that structure, we're not in the business to finance that. So items that are movable, furnishings, chairs, tables, whatever that may be, that can go from place to place, and the inventory all of a sudden not accountable for, we're not financing that. We're not purchasing any type of vehicle fleets for utility departments. When it comes to fixed in place, it's allowable where you would put a fixed in place freezer, a stove, range, such in a senior community center. That's the intent, is not to move. We've had allowed where they would put in a facility for food preparation, the large table that's a cutting block that is actually attached to the floor and very difficult to remove from that. Fixtures, as long as they're in place, they're okay to do. So if you're looking at equipment purchases, it's usually ineligible, but we can take care of those that are an integral part of that structure that's being rehabbed or built. Does that answer your question, Rebecca?
It did. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Hopefully you'll get that right on the test.
I hope so too.
Yeah, fundability. Fundability is a key, as we talked about, that moves through the program from beginning to end. And fundability includes the eligible activities and the national objective as you go through that. So we review that from fundability tests. So all activities must be eligible for funding and meet a national objective. So those are two key parts of fundability. So if you want to check your slides, or when you get to the quiz, make sure you understand that. Okay, move on. Here are some of the statutory and regulatory provisions that must meet a national objective and activities that must be eligible. As we said, we give priorities to those activities. If it's not mentioned in the slideshow, I highly recommend that you go to, as Rebecca said, the HUD Exchange, and that you review the state guide to national objectives and eligible activities, and make sure you're in the edition that was updated. because it provides a number of examples for you if you were developing a project and wanted to know if is this activity eligible, and if so, how do I meet the national objective with this activity? Is there anything else, Rebecca? Oh.
You got 3 more slides.
Okay, I think I can handle that. So the federal government, HUD, monitors the state of Nebraska. And part of their checklist is that when they monitor the state, they will pull specific grants, files. They will then go through our records and make sure that we, the state, in the administration of the grant, CDBG, have met for those projects we fund the fundability test. So in the beginning, prior to approval, when we do an application review, we must make sure that that proposed activity meets a national objective and is eligible prior to the award process, which is the notice of approval. Now, the state also must do a couple other items. One, we check, even though in your application you identify that system for awards management, that the local government is actually registered within the system and has no problems there. We also run a check before we do the approval process to make sure that they're registered in SAM. We also must determine that the eligible activities or the activities applied for are eligible and originally approved for the award. Get it? So at this, go ahead, Rebecca.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No, you were going to say.
I was going to say, if anyone wants to type in the chat, what are the 2 elements for the project meeting the CDBG fundability and when? And so does anybody want to add on to that? And we did have a question, Steve, for disclosure of survey purposes. They know you can state it is for CDBG. Can you stipulate that it is measuring low mod income? And she thought that would be leading. So going back to the income survey piece of it, I believe we have publicizing is that do not state that you are conducting a survey to find out how many low to moderate income people are in the area. That is frowned upon. I believe you can reference it as for the community development block grant. I believe that's in CBD 14-02 or 3. I'll look into that and I'll send it out to you guys and double check that.
As Rebecca says, you want to be very careful on how you word the intro, or how you, if you have persons that probably at this time aren't going door to door, but even if you would do it in a means where it's mailed out or however collected, that the language is such you're not encouraging them to answer the survey so that you can receive funding because they're low moderate income. So Rebecca will send out some more information that will give you some clarity on that with regards to the income survey methodology and what can be provided. So I went through the eligible activities and ineligibles quickly because there are resources for you to go to. So you want to close it out on that, Rebecca?
Yeah, so we have, we included references and resources here for you guys to check into as you are learning about new items here. Feel free to take a look at them. We've been implementing the 2 CFR Part 200 for a while now. But if you've been working with projects that are older than 2015, you might have to look at older regulations. So just an FYI on that. We'll be talking a little bit more into this also. And then I did want to go back to our website. You go to opportunity.nebraska.gov/CDBG. That's a quick URL. If you don't want to go through everything in the system, going through all the clicks, it'll take you right here. We have our CDBG funding opportunities we talk about when they're due, what the overall purpose is of this opportunity funding option, and feel free if you guys ever have questions to reach out to us. We have national objectives here. So Steve referenced the guide to national objectives and eligible activities for the state program. This is a good resource for you guys to check out. It was last updated December 2014. I would add it to your must-read list of better understanding the CDBG program. And it goes through everything here. If you have questions, this kind of covers everything and some within the state program, and some of it doesn't apply to you, like the overall expenditure level, benefit to LMI persons. This is something that Steve and I monitor at the state level, so you don't need to concern yourself about that, but it's also just good to know like why we are implementing the program like we are. So feel free to take a look at that. We have links to the CPD notices here that I talked about for the income survey, and just providing you information there. Our application guidelines. So for, we are hosting our application guidelines for 2020 are all right here and apply to every single funding opportunity. So if we click into this, Steve referenced that we do have eligible priority activities. So we do list those all out here, and we have them underneath the main heading of public facilities and improvements, public service. And again, you can only apply for public service activities within the youth job training opportunity and also the emergent threat opportunity. We have housing, economic development, planning, and then administration costs. So just an FYI there for reference. We are currently conducting CDBG application guideline webinars on each of our 2020 application funding opportunities, and we'll be placing them here. These are recordings from those webinars. So if you guys missed any of those, we are hosting a total of 10, and we'll be adding, I think, 2 more webinars later today if you guys want to take a look at those. These are our 2019 CDBG application guidelines. These will be taken down come July 30th. We keep them up there because our program year is open from July 1 to June 30th. So we're currently in the 2019 program year, but we'll be taking these down eventually. So if you want to look at those, feel free to. And the F4, the manual is located here. If you guys want to know about upcoming trainings for grant administrators, you can click this. We also update the list of certified grant administrators. So if you want to see when your expiration date is after you are fully certified, you can click on this right there. And then here's the manual, all chapters, or you can search by individual chapters. So, and we do let you know, like, when was the last time we updated this. So September 2019 is the environmental review record. With the use of internet and the cookies, sometimes please check the footer on the manual chapter. It should match up with the date of September 2019 on there. If it does not, you may have to delete the cookies on your internet browser that you're using. So just an FYI to double check that. Make sure you're viewing the most up-to-date information. We have CDBG policy memos located here. These are our first release as a policy memo, and then we do incorporate them within the manual. It just doesn't happen at the same time. So just an FYI, please keep an eye out on any policy memos that are issued by us. We also have technical assistance. We've been hosting presentations on different topics. So we'll be adding to this throughout the year. It's something we just kicked off this year. So, and then any forms and templates are located here. So this is just a nice once over of our website. For your reference, for those that are seeking full certification training, you'll need to, full certification status, you'll need to complete your quiz by this Friday. And please let us know if you did not receive a classmaker notification. Allison Cumbier is working a limited amount of hours currently, so please CC myself and Steve on that email. That would be greatly appreciated so we can quickly get you guys access to that. And I'm not seeing any other questions. We hope you join us for the next webinar. This webinar is being recorded and eventually will be posted on our website. Still, we'll send you an email once it is available to view. Anything else you want to add, Steve?
Just a couple reminders. You're working through the process of becoming certified as an administrator of the CDBG, or you're gaining additional information to develop projects. So there are other sessions coming along. I would encourage you to attend those, especially the one on procurement, because please don't fall within a position where you've written an application and you've helped the applicant prepare their request for proposals and how to do everything. There's a number of issues that you need to be very clear on when it comes to procurement, whether it's for the aspect of the application or moving on in terms of the services. The second item is you do not need to be a certified administrator to prepare the application, which hopefully everyone understands. You need to be certified to have it. The local government is required to have a certified administrator manage that grant for them. That's one of the requirements of the special conditions under the grant agreement. So other than that, if you do have questions, email me and I'll attempt to answer as clearly as I can. If you want an extensive amount of details, email Rebecca. She'll be glad to chat with me and we can figure out how to put that together for you. And please continue with making sure you're on track with the quizzes and that you take the exam by when, Rebecca?
Friday is the quiz, and I don't have the specific date for the exam. I believe they have until next month.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay, so make sure you don't let that time lapse. It's easy to do that. I don't have anything else,
Cool.
Rebecca, except
That
thanks to
works.
everyone for listening.
Yeah, thank you all for attending. And then if you guys have any suggestions on if we need to do something differently for the next one, please let us know because this is the first time we are doing it. So any feedback is welcomed. And feel free to direct that to me. But you guys have a good day.